All right. Hey, everybody. Looks like we are live. Welcome to the Ansible and F5 Hands-On Automation Workshop. We're going to give it a few minutes for people to join here. Looks like it's just a minute after the hour, so we'll give it another minute or so. And then once we get a few more people in, we'll get started. And thank you for joining us. And just a little bit of housekeeping while we wait for a few more people to join. As you're consuming this, if you notice that the content itself seems a little fuzzy, on the WWT platform where the video is at, if you click on the gear icon, and when you click on that, you'll see the resolution options that are there. We've seen where sometimes your bandwidth will auto negotiate to like 240p. So make sure that if it does seem fuzzy, click that and then set it to 720p. And that way, when we get to the point of starting to go through the lab and sharing a browser, you'll be able. All right, we'll give it just another few seconds here and then we'll get going. All right, we'll get started. So thank you to everybody for joining. Again, today, this event, it's the Ansible and F5 Hands-On Automation Workshop. And I'll be your host today. My name is Nick Thompson. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect here at Worldwide Technology. I am a member of our global engineering team, and I'm focused on infrastructure programmability and automation. I have a background in professional services delivery of a whole bunch of different technologies, and really have been able to kind of leverage that past experience as I've moved into this automation space for the last few years. All of my contact information is on the screen, link to my profile on wwt.com, link to my LinkedIn, and then my GitHub for some of the code repos that I've posted that are out there. So with that, the agenda for today is what we're going to do is very quickly, we're going to go over just a quick introduction of who WWT is and the WWT.com platform. Then we're going to get into an Ansible overview, right? And the idea of this is really kind of think of it as an entry level introduction to Ansible and using Ansible for infrastructure automation. So we're going to go through an overview of the Ansible platform. We're going to talk about all of the constructs that go into writing playbooks and how to do that. And then we're going to get into Ansible Tower. And then after that, once we get through kind of the lecture part of this, if you will, we're going to get into the F5 Ansible Automation Lab. And we'll do that together as a joint exercise. And then at the end, we'll wrap up on some resources that we've got available to you. So just at a very high level, right? I know we've got a lot of our valued customers out there. This will probably seem a little repetitive, but I know we've got a lot of people that are new to WWT as well joining us. And really what I wanted to do was just at a high level, introduce WWT, right? So we are a $13 billion privately held global technology solutions provider. We're 31 years old now this summer with over 7,000 employees across the globe. I think one of the things that we're really proud of as a company is the fact that we've been on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for the last 10 years. This is something that from a culture standpoint is really important to us. And another big key thing is that for us as a technology solution provider, and especially as we've really dove into infrastructure automation over these past years, being the top partner with vendors like F5 and others is really key to us for being able to leverage not only how we deliver and how we've traditionally delivered their technologies, but provide that long-term industry knowledge and relationship to help us figure out how to automate these and put all of these different solutions together. One of the other things I think to call out is that some of the different areas that we focus on, our biggest differentiator in how we're going to work with our customers and deliver what we're going to go over today is through our Advanced Technology Center. So our Advanced Technology Center is our innovation lab located in St. Louis. I think the big thing to call out here is that this environment, right? If you can see the numbers on the left of the slide, it's a huge physical environment, right? Over 4 data centers, 20,000 plus VMs running, a huge amount of resource and capital put into this to really help our customers learn and understand technologies and be able to prove and vet and test these things inside their environment. And all of this resource that we have here is what's allowing us to deliver the on-demand lab that we're going to go through today. And what I wanted to do is just very quickly hop out to WWT.com, and I'm going to walk you through some of the resources that we've got available, walk you through how to get into the lab, which we'll touch on again a little bit later. But then from there, just kind of show you some things that are available to you once this session is done today. So I'm going to switch over to my browser, and I'm going to bring up WWT.com. So all of you that are here today had to register for the event, right? So you should have an account on WWT.com. You are going to see, if you're logged in up in the top right, you should see my WWT with your name there. If you're not logged in, click log in and you'll be able to get in. But from there, once you're on the WWT.com platform, what I really wanted to do was just highlight a handful of different areas where we're really kind of providing value to our customers in specifically the infrastructure automation space. But then from there, kind of guide you to a bunch of different things that may be of interest at a later date. So across the top, you're going to see this link bar, right? You're going to see from solutions through ATC. If I click on solutions, the first tab that comes up is automation and orchestration, and then you're going to see infrastructure automation. So when I click on infrastructure automation, this is going to take you to the topic page for our automation practice. And really the meat of the content is when you roll down to the middle here, right? And what we're going to focus on is all of the different things that we have here. If we look at this link carousel from different articles that we've posted to case studies, and I think where most people go and where I would definitely recommend you go and check things out is our labs tab, right? And when these labs are posted, if we look up at the top, you have the ability to filter content. So I'm just going to go to popular to pull a bunch of these to the front that are used the most. And you'll see that the F5 Ansible Automation Training Lab, which we're going to go through as we go through this session, is available here. We have all of these different labs that are available. And when you click on one of these labs, what you're going to see is an overview of that lab page. you're going to get, kind of a high level topology of what's inside that lab. You're going to get all of the goals and objectives, kind of an idea or a breakdown of what hardware and software are inside that lab. And then, generally all of the information that you're going to need to do that. Now, normally on a day on any other day than today, when you get to this lab page, you would click Launch Lab, and that would be how you would do that. However, what we're going to do today is a little bit differently because of this event, and we've got a bunch of copies of this lab staged and ready to go. So, obviously we'll get to that in just a second, but another thing I wanted to touch on is as you visit wwt.com, right, whether you go down through the left or you go through all the solutions on the top, there's a lot of on-demand labs. There's a lot of content that are much more than just infrastructure automation, right? So if we were to go in and we were to look at networking, right, and we look at the labs that are available here, all of these different labs, whether they're on demand or scheduled, right, and generally a scheduled lab is going to have something backed by physical hardware. But when you pull up one of those labs, you're going to see if Launch Lab is there, it's on demand, 24/7, 365. Click that button, you'll get dropped into an environment. You'll be ready to go and have access to that. So, after this event, as you're looking to explore and find more things to learn, make sure to go through all of the different solution and topic areas and find any of the content that may be of interest to you. So for today, though, as we're talking about this, what we want to do is up in the top right, you're going to see My WWT once you're logged in. And so go ahead and click on that. And once you're inside there, you're going to see a bunch of links down to the left. And what we want to focus on is the events link, right? And so if you click that events link, what it's going to do is it's going to take you to a page showing you the events that you're attending. And what you're going to see or should see at the top is the event that we're hosting right now, the Hands-on F5 Automation Workshop. So what you're going to want to do is go ahead and click on that. Give it a second here to load. Oh, I'll get to that a different way. So once that event page loads, what you're going to do is you're going to have the ability then to you're going to see in the section there's going to be a spot with the lab. And let me pull this up in a different way. One second here. I do apologize for that. Oh, there it went. So now that the events page is up, you're going to see as we scroll down, right, you're going to have a lab section here, right? And it's going to say F5 Ansible Automation Training Labs. And you're going to click Access Lab. And when you click Access Lab, it's going to launch a copy of that lab. You'll get a pop-up down at the bottom right that tells you that this lab is ready to go. And when you click that, it's going to take you over to the My Labs page. And what you're going to see is you're going to see an instantiated copy of the F5 Ansible Automation Training Lab here. And when you click on that, you're going to get the page. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to see the Open an ATC Lab Gateway button. And when you click on that, what it's going to do is it's going to launch the connection into the lab for you so that you're inside the environment. And this is all self-contained, self-hosted. You don't need a VPN or anything like that. You're going to be dropped right in through the web browser. You're going to be dropped into the jump box. It'll take just a few seconds to load. And then what you'll notice is once you're inside this UI, you're going to see the lab guide on the left, right? And this is going to break down everything that we're going to go through in the lab, right? How to get started, what's the topology, the big thing on that first page, right? What are my login credentials that I need to get through all of these different devices? And then when you click next, you're going to start to drive through and get all of the various sections of the lab guide. If you need more space, go ahead and drag it over to the right. You're going to, start to get all of the content from the lab guide. And then the thing you'll notice is that if there's anything that you need to copy and paste, you'll see a little copy icon. And when you click that, it'll put it in your clipboard and you'll have the ability then to paste it into the jump box. So that's just at a high level, kind of a very quick tour of how we're going to get into the lab. The other thing I wanted to pull up, and we'll drop the links in the chat later on, but some of the ways to keep in touch with WWT as it relates to infrastructure automation, and these will get dropped in the chat. The first one is our infrastructure automation community. This is kind of the centralized hub, if you will, for all things infrastructure automation here at WWT. So this is where we're going to break down, all of the things that we think are important for you, what we do and how we do it, some information about some meetups that we host, and then links to all of the labs and people in the practice and things that are interesting here. So that's definitely something if you want to, continue to follow and pick up new content and resources, that's a great place to join. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight, and you saw it down here in the middle for the WWT.com or for the WWT plus meetup, that community that's located here is a centralized point where we're using it to collect content for the RTP Programmability and Automation Meetup group, which is a group that we host and meets once or twice a month as it relates to various infrastructure automation topics. The interesting part is that there is a session this afternoon at 3:00. So if you're still interested in learning and picking up more knowledge, today at 3:00 Eastern, Joel King from our global engineering practice is going to be presenting a session on learning the tools of the trade and building a proper development environment on your workstation. So that is this afternoon at 3:00 Central, if that interests you. And I know that link will get dropped in the chat. So what I'm going to do now is we'll get back into the presentation and then we'll get started and then we'll come back to the lab in a little bit. So let me flip back to PowerPoint and reshare. Red Hat Ansible, right? This is going to be kind of that introductory overview of Ansible itself. So what is Ansible, right? Ansible, it's enterprise software. It's used for automating repetitive tasks and managing infrastructure. I think the interesting part about Ansible is that it's written in Python, and all of the playbooks that you write are going to be written in YAML. It is event, so there's hundreds of platforms of support, which is really interesting, right? From cloud and network to compute, storage, security. The fact that it is written in Python, if you need to support a platform that's not not out there today, you have that ability to do that and those modules and interact with really anything that's got an API. And it's really there for the management of the full infrastructure lifecycle, right? From provisioning an environment to the long-term configuration management of it. And a lot of times as we're working with people, the question that we get is, well, why should we use Ansible, right? And I think it really comes down to three things. And it's the fact that Ansible is simple to use. It's the playbooks, and as you see as we get into this, they're very easy to read. If it's something that is new to you, you'll pick it up very quickly. It's agentless, right? We all know a ton of environments have 10, 15 agents, it seems like, deployed on any server that's under management. Ansible doesn't require agents, right? It's using SSH and various other protocols to manage the end state of those devices. So there's nothing that you need to install on the workload that you're trying to manage. And it's extremely powerful, right? Having that ability to work across all of those varying platforms gives you that ability to really orchestrate a big, broad swath of use cases and get really kind of you can get some really interesting things done by being able to, provision things end to end across the entire stack that's, either in your data center or in the cloud. Again, to that point, right, the idea of Ansible and the Ansible automation platform, which I'll talk about in a second here, what that includes, is that this is going to be that common tool across all of your different teams, right? From your traditional systems administrators that are maybe managing your Linux or your Windows environments to network operations, security operations, and again, all of those varying platforms. The Ansible automation platform is really the key to that. And that automation platform is really made up of a handful of different products, right? It's Ansible Engine, but then it's Ansible Tower, which we'll get into a little bit later. You've got the idea of the content collections and the automation hub, which is going to be a place to go find certified content from Red Hat. An analytics platform, which is really key as you're doing automation, right? How do I show value back to the business that these automations are being run and that we're saving time by having automated a task? And then obviously a lot of times just a service catalog. How do I drive someone to a portal that they can go out and consume automation without having to really know what's being done behind the scenes, right? And just give someone that ability to go somewhere and request resources. So how does Ansible work? I think the big thing to call out is, first of all, the workflow, right? You have a control host, and that control host could be your laptop. It could be Ansible Tower. It could be a centralized server in your environment that you're using. Whatever that is, at the end of the day, that control host is going to have Ansible on it. It's going to have reachability to those devices that you're managing, whether in this case F5, Cisco, Red Hat, Linux boxes, whatever it is. As long as it's got reachability, it's going to be able to manage that. Now, that control host, right, it's going to have an inventory. What are those devices I'm targeting? It's going to have those playbooks that are in the environment that are going to do something, right? The idea of this, and I think one of the things to think about, is that if you look at how Ansible works, and if you're familiar with any kind of traditional programming languages, Ansible really works in kind of a triple for loop, right? And the idea of this is that for every play that you're running, it's going to go through that play and it's going to execute the tasks. And every one of those tasks is then going to execute against all of the hosts that are being targeted with that job. So the idea here is that you can create one playbook, you can target varying points in your environment, you can target different devices. It's all going to be very easy, very straightforward to use and work through, right? And as we look at this, right, the first concept that really gets us going is that concept of the playbook, right? And when we look at a playbook, there's a kind of a few ways to break it down. And first of all, playbooks are written in YAML, right? You're going to see them start with that triple dash. That's going to be that kind of beginning of everything, right? Once it's written in YAML, those playbooks are composed of plays. And that play itself is going to contain tasks. Those tasks are, what are we doing? Those tasks then invoke modules. And then from that, I think the big thing to call out, and what makes this such an interesting platform and an easy platform to pick up, is that it's executed sequentially, right? Top down. So as you look at a playbook, and as if you've got someone on your team or someone in your organization that's already using Ansible, they're kind of self-documenting, right? If you look at that playbook, if you're picking up that content for the first time and you're looking at it, as you look at that play, you'll get an idea of what it's doing very quickly, right? And I think that's a big thing to highlight. To execute a playbook, you run the Ansible playbook command, the Ansible-playbook command from the command line, right? And in this example, right, calling a playbook from the command line, feeding it an inventory that says, hey, go target this device. And then it's going to go out and it's going to do its thing, right? So this playbook in this example is going to go out to a switch. It's going to configure some VLANs and put some IP address information on them. So the idea of this is that whether you're targeting an F5 load balancer or a Cisco switch or a Linux host, right? If you're using the Ansible engine product from your workstation, you're going to interact with it with the Ansible playbook command. Now, the cool part, right, is that when a playbook runs, you do get results every time that playbook runs, right? So you're going to see a summary that after the playbook is finished is going to give you the details that you need to know. What did it do? Did it change things, right? In this example, right, there were 9 tasks that didn't have to do anything. They were in the proper configured state. And I think that's one of the beauties of Ansible as well, right? It's going to, as you run a playbook, it's going to look and see, do I actually need to make a change? And if it doesn't have to make that change, it's just going to move on. It's not going to update anything on the infrastructure. But if it did have to change something, you're going to get that in that summary. You're going to see that in this example, right, 7 tasks resulted in a change on the end device that we were targeting. Another thing that's important to note, right? Playbooks can be run in what's called check mode. And when you run a playbook in check mode, it's going to look as though it's executing the play against the environment, but it's not actually going to make any changes. So you're going to get a summary output showing you what would have happened, but know that it didn't go out and it didn't make any changes when it ran that dry run. So back to that playbook example, right? And as we start to break down the content of a playbook and look at this kind of more in depth, the first thing that you're going to notice up at the top is the hosts line, right? The hosts define the where. What are the devices that we're going to target? That can be, and we'll get into inventories in a little bit, but that can be a single device, that can be a group of devices, right? So the hosts, again, where are we doing the work? Tasks define the what. What am I doing to those end devices, right? This is going to be that ordered list of operations that the automation is going to do on the target devices. Now, when we talk about the where, right, and we look at either groups or individual devices, the idea of all of this is that there's a few different ways to handle inventory inside Ansible, right? And first of all, there's the concept of static Ansible inventories, right? These are going to be files on your system. By default, if you just install Ansible from scratch in /etc/Ansible/hosts, that's where you would see these files live. And there's really two formats that you can do this in, right? You have the INI format, which is kind of just a fixed structure where you've, straight text file. And then you've got a YAML format, which I think for the most part is probably what we see the most of these days, not only with our people that are using Ansible on a regular basis, but a lot of our customers as well are kind of pivoting more towards the YAML inventory format. But at the end of the day, when you look at this, they're doing the same thing, right? First of all, in that inventory file, you have host entries, right? These are going to be just specific devices. I'm going to put in a DNS entry. I'm going to have access to that, and I can call that directly. I can target at the top of that playbook a specific host. But I also have the concept of inventory groups. So if I need to target multiple devices, I have that ability then to target, in this example, web servers directly, right? And that's going to get me both of those hosts that are inside that group. Anytime you run a playbook, right? If you don't use the default inventory, and most people don't, right? I would say general best practice if you're using Ansible Engine is to probably keep an inventory for that job in the project root somewhere, right? If it's something that you're kind of having a one-off for. But you would load the Ansible playbook -I, and then you would, whatever the path to your inventory file is, if it's in a non-standard location, and then you call the playbook from there. And that's going to allow you to build out that content, load those targets and use those hosts or those host groups in your playbook itself. The other thing that you can do with Ansible inventory is you actually have the ability to do nested inventory groups, right? And I think this is really, really key when you think about having a dispersed network or a dispersed environment where you're targeting, maybe multiple branch offices, or you've got all of these, types of scenarios that you're covering. And if we look at that, right, we talked about inventory groups with that prior slide. So here I've got multiples, right? I've got, different regions, different cities called out where I've got, maybe routers in all of those different cities. And then I've got the ability then to take those cities. I could write a playbook and I could target Minneapolis directly, or I could target Atlanta directly. But maybe what I want to do is I want to break this down and I want to have nested inventory groups, right? So in the Midwest, I'm going to target Minneapolis, Chicago, and St. Louis. Down south, it's going to be Dallas and Atlanta. Or I have a, overarching group where I can call the USA, which has nested inventory groups in part of that, right? So you have this ability to do multiple nestings, which will help you really decide when you're running a play, what am I targeting and how am I going to target that? I may focus on an individual site or an individual device, or I may say I'm going to run this on an entire region across the country. So with static inventories, what I've shown you here, the beauty of these is they're easy to set up, they're easy to consume. But the problem is they really don't scale, right? If you're trying to work as a team, if you have a massive environment where you're really trying to target, thousands and thousands of devices, I would even argue hundreds of devices, this starts to get a little unwieldy. What you really want to start to look at is dynamic inventory, right? And Ansible itself has the concept of inventory plugins, which is how can I query an existing potential source of truth for my device inventory, right? So whether I'm querying, say, F5 Big IQ, or I'm querying AWS directly from the console to get a listing of all of the instances, or if I've got Netbox as a source of truth for my network environment, how do I get all of the inventory out of that? Or hopefully you've got a good ServiceNow CMDB, right? Being able to query that and return that information dynamically is really key, right? So that rather than having to, probably keep one of these solutions up to date, which you're already doing anyways, and then have to manually update a static inventory file on Ansible, it really tends to be a bunch of rework. So being able to dynamically query some of these different sources, even if it's just a big CSV file that's in a shared location, that's doable as well, right? So having that ability, and the documentation link is below, and I know we'll get that dropped into the chat if this is of interest to you, but this is how you really start to make it scale, right? So that Ansible is consuming data and details from some other system of truth that you've already got inside your environment. So now that we've talked about, where the playbook is going to work and what the tasks are doing, right? What we really want to do is we want to talk about the next step, right? So inside a task, modules are really what are going to represent the mechanics of that task, right? These modules are going to be, task specific. They're going to do a thing, right? Whatever that thing is. And those individual modules, as you call them, are going to be written to do that one thing, right? If we look at that, all of those different modules that exist are going to have parameters, and those parameters are going to specify how that module should operate. Every one of these modules that are out there, across all of the different vendors, are all well documented. So what are the options I need, what are the parameters that are required, from usernames and passwords or any of those different options that may be out there. And all of those are going to be defined with examples and different things like that, so that as you're getting started with this, as you're writing your first plays, you've got that ability then to go, okay, I need to go, like we'll do in a little bit, I need to go create a pool on F5. What are the options I need to provide? So all of that documentation is posted and publicly available. We'll make sure that we get that dropped into the chat, just a link to kind of the overall module resources, and being able to help you understand that you don't have to you don't really have to worry. You just have to know, I want to do this thing to this device. Go look through the module list, validate, is it there, and then how do I use it or consume that module, right? The thing about modules, and I think what's really important to think about as well, is that the modules themselves kind of define how Ansible is going to talk to that end device, right? So if you think about all of the varying devices in your environment and all of the different ways to log in and manage them, whether it's F5 load balancers, and we're going to use REST API to talk to those, or you're going out to the cloud and you're managing instances in AWS, right? Or if you've got Cisco devices inside your environment, there's all sorts of configuration ways to deal with that depending on the platform, right? Am I SSHing into that router or switch? Am I using REST to manage an APIC? Or maybe I'm using netconf to push that configuration to those devices, as well as, right, if you're using Ansible to manage Linux boxes, being able to access those over SSH. So the module is what defines how Ansible is going to talk to that device, so that you don't have to worry directly, how am I going to do this? The module will take care of that for you. There may be some minor configuration options that you need to set to at the beginning of the play, but all of that will be well documented with the modules based on what you're trying to do. So when we look at that playbook that was up, and when we look at how are modules distributed inside or with Ansible, right? This has changed a little bit in the last year or so, right? The idea with Ansible forever was it was batteries included. You would install Ansible, you would get all of the modules with it. Everything that you needed was kind of with that main install, and that was great to a point. But as Ansible has taken off, right, and its industry adoption has grown, and more people are continuing to use it across the board, what happened is that they had to start to split up. How do I have the core of the product, right? How do I have Ansible engine? And then I have the collections. And I have the idea of how am I packaging up those modules and all of those things that Ansible is doing. And what they did is they split that off into Ansible collections, right? So collections are really just a distribution format for the content that can include playbooks and roles. But primarily what you see a lot of it now is for module distribution, right? So by moving to the collection module, having the ability then to split that up allows the Ansible kind of core product, the engine product, to develop and release on more of a regular cadence. But the collections can be updated at any time. So if F5 is updating their collection, or Cisco is updating their collection, in the past, they would have had to wait for the next Ansible release to get a fix out, right? Now with collections, they can release those versions at any time, and you have the ability then to install those collections on your workstation, or on your Tower instance using Ansible Galaxy or the Ansible Automation Hub to pull these collections down and get those installed into your environment. And to do that, and we'll go through this in the lab, you just run the Ansible Galaxy tool from the command line, and you define the collection that you want to install. And really, if you think about it, they're all going to be following that namespace.collection naming convention, right? So if you look in the example on the left here, you've got collections, and in this playbook example, it's Cisco.aci is the collection that we're installing. Those are going to be, the namespace is generally going to be the OEM, and then the collection is going to be generally the collection targeting whatever that specific product that you're automating against is. So this is, again, kind of a big departure of how it was always done in the past, but it's extremely flexible, right? And as manufacturers are releasing new software, or there's a bug fix that needs to come out, you don't have to wait for a long time for that fix to come, right? You can go update the collection at any point in time. So that kind of breaks down the mechanics, if you will, of a playbook, right? But now what we want to do is get into how are we passing data into these playbooks, and how are we being able to reuse these across multiple devices? And I think the first key to that is variables, right? And being able to understand that inside a playbook, and there's all sorts of different ways to define variables, but I'm going to focus on two different areas, right? First of all, you can define playbooks in the you can define variables in the playbook itself. So I have a var stanza, and you can see in this example on the left, I'm defining a tenant name and a vCenter domain there, right? That's hard-coded in the playbook. I also have the ability to call in and load a vars file on the right, which you can see, right? I'm pulling in the credentials, and my username and password are defined in a separate file on the file system that are not part of the main playbook. When we look at a variable, right, once they're defined, I need to be able to consume them, right? And to consume a variable, I'm going to, as you can see on the top here, I'm going to call it out with the two brackets inside quotes and the variable name in the middle. And as we look at some of these examples that are highlighted, you can see how that's used throughout. And I can use a variable multiple places throughout the playbook. It might be a one-off for one module, but at the end of the day, being able to call and reuse those, whether I'm loading it from a file or I'm loading it from the playbook directly, is really the key to be able to apply a play to do multiple different things to an environment. The other thing that you can do is, say you've hard-coded a variable in a file and you're going to use a playbook to target maybe a different system or something like that, and you need to override that. You do have the ability to pass in extra variables from the command line. So I would call that Ansible playbook command with the path to the playbook that I'm going to run. And then I do the -e command flag, and I have the ability then to pass in the variables on the command line that way. So if I needed to override credentials or something like that, I can do that from the command line as I call it. Another place that I can apply variables is actually in the inventory file itself, right? So when I talked about inventory a little bit ago, when we look at the different groups, or the different inventory groups that are out there, if we look at this example on the left, you're going to see behind, Midway Router 01, I've defined Ansible host equals 10.10.255.1. So what did that do, right? First of all, I have, by default, any host entry that you put in inventory, it's going to do a DNS lookup for that host name, right? Maybe you don't have a DNS entry for that router. So using Ansible_host in the inventory file will override and tell Ansible, when you run against this inventory location, set the IP address to this, target it at this address. And you can see that between, whether it's the INI format or in YAML, they're basically set at the same place, right? Where you're defining that variable on the YAML format under the host entry, and then you define the variable with a key and a value pair in YAML. The other thing that you can do with variables is that I may regionalize some things, right? So if we look at here in St. Louis, I have specific NTP servers that I'm going to apply to a location. So in the inventory file, I can override that, right? I can say that for St. Louis, specific, make sure that NTP equals ntp.stlouis.wwtatc.com. And you can see how that's done at both the group level in the YAML format and in the INI format on the left here. So being able to do that and kind of leverage where you're defining variables and how you're consuming them is really key. If I do go back one slide, one thing to make note of is there is a big amount of variable precedence. There's like 22 different ways that variables can be consumed in a playbook. That is well documented on that link, and we'll get that into the chat. So that is something to think about as you're starting to write playbooks. Where am I going to define variables and how are they going to be consumed? Paying attention to that precedence is key, but it's not something that as we kind of get started, you really have to think about. But as you start to grow your Ansible skill set, that is something that will come out or will come up at a later date. So in that example a little earlier ago, you saw a credentials file, right? And so I had a variable file called credentials.yaml, and I had a username and password in there, and it was hard coded. We generally don't want to do that, right? You don't want to leave files laying around on the file system or in Git that have usernames and passwords in them. And so we can solve that with Ansible Vault, right? And Ansible Vault is a command line tool. It encrypts variables, right? Specifically, I can put an encrypted string in that playbook directly, or I can encrypt an entire file so that it is encrypted at rest using AES 256. When we look at kind of the breakdown of one versus the other, right? When we just encrypt a variable, the file itself is going to be plain text. There may be other variables in there. I'm going to have one specific variable and one value for that variable that's going to be encrypted. And I can only encrypt just the variables when I do it that way. I do have the ability, though, with the tool to encrypt an entire file, right? So we would have to load anything out of that file. We would then have to decrypt the entire file. But the contents can be really any structured data, which is really cool. And we usually see, for the most part, that if you're going to do it, most people lean towards kind of a full encrypted file. But if we were to look at this, how does it work, right? From a variable standpoint, we're going to generate an encrypted string, again, using that Ansible Vault command line command. And we're going to do Ansible-Vault encrypt_string. We're going to give it a string to encrypt, right? So what is my password, maybe? And then I'm going to prompt and ask for vault password, right? So once it's encrypted, I need to know that passphrase that was set to encrypt it in order to decrypt it, right? So if we look at this example, right, we're passing in, I want to encrypt secret PW as my string, and I'm going to ask, for that vault password. So I would type in a password, and it's just going to output on the command line that variable information that I need there, right? If we look at how I consume that in a playbook, if I go back and I look at this, right, I would define a variable for password, and then the value for that is just going to be that vault block that was dumped out on the command line. So now I have username admin, and I took that secret PW password and encrypted it. So in the playbook, you don't see that password natively. You see the output from the tool and the encrypted string for that password. So when I run the playbook, right, to show the decrypted value here, you can see that I have to run the playbook with the -- ask vault password option at the end. And when it runs, it's going to then take that password. It's going to be able to decrypt that variable, and then that gives us access to that variable to consume it in the playbook. Again, a thing to think about, though, is that you do have the variable that you encrypt is only encrypted at rest. So once it's decrypted and it's used and it's being passed around, there are other things that you're going to have to focus on, right? And you can see in this example, there's a no log option, right? And what that's going to do is make sure that you can not dump that decrypted value to the command line if you run this playbook, right? Being able to do that is really key, because again, it's only encrypted at rest, and you have to make sure that depending on how you're passing it around, or if you're using any modules or anything like that, you want to make sure that that value that you're using is being protected in flight as well. So the other thing that you can do is the whole file side, right? So if we look at this, right, in our example, we would create a variables file, and it's going to have those key value pairs, right? So I have username admin, and then I have my secret password. I'm going to, again, consume that have that playbook consume that and load that variable file natively. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the Ansible Vault encrypt command to encrypt that file itself. So what it's going to do is it's going to prompt me for a password. I will type that password in, and then from there, it's going to take that file on the file system, and it's going to completely encrypt it. And the mechanism to run the playbook, whether it's an encrypted file or you're doing a variable, is exactly the same, right? So now I have that ability. Again, I just run the Ansible playbook with the -- ask vault password, once I type in the password to decrypt the vault, it will move on and pull those values in from that encrypted file as well. So one of the things to think about, though, when I'm using variables versus files, I think is if you're committing everything back to Git, one of the things to think about is that if you're using variables that are defined and you're only encrypting the variable, when you commit something back to Git, that commit message can say, "Hey, I've updated this variable," and you're going to see that just that single variable entry in the file has changed in the Git commit log, right? But if you look at if you do the whole file and you're storing an encrypted file in Git, whether it's one variable or 10 variables that you've updated in that commit, you're gonna have a Git commit log that's gonna show that, right? So one of the things that we at a quick glance when you're doing the whole files to think about is be specific in your commit messages when you're putting that back up so that people can understand if it was a major or a minor change that you did make to the file when you encrypted it. So obviously this is great, right? From a standpoint of having static files that are stored, but a lot of times you want to deal with third-party credentials, or you want to have integration into some other third-party credential management system. And Red Hat, there's a few different ways to do this. You can integrate, obviously we'll get into Ansible Tower. Ansible Tower itself has the ability to augment and deal with third-party collections third-party credentials, excuse me, and give you the ability to where a user can run a playbook and have no idea of what the credentials are being used. Same thing, you can integrate with HashiCorp Vault. CyberArk Conjur is another commonly supported tool set that's out there. All of these, there's a ton of documentation on using the credential management of these features with Ansible, but just wanted to call it out that if these are things that you're using inside your enterprise already to manage credentials, you can integrate with them and have that ability to centrally secure your credentials versus have them stored on a file system somewhere. So now that we've talked about kind of the structure of how do I write variables, how do I write a playbook, right, from targeting an inventory to the mechanics of writing a play with modules and the parameters. One of the things that Ansible is really good at as well is being able to just query a system and get information back about it, right? And we can do that using Ansible Facts to gather data about a system, right? Now, facts themselves are really a way to just have Ansible describe a system and what it is and what it's doing potentially, right? So some just very high level examples of things that you can get out, right? I can query a system to get its operating system. I can figure out what IP addresses have been assigned to interfaces. If it's a Linux box, I can see what file systems are attached. Routers and switches, details about those interfaces, MAC addresses, potentially packet counters, things like that, as well as just in general, for the most part, what software is installed, any hardware information about the device. And the really interesting part is that facts are returned as structured data, so I can consume them at a later date, right? So I may need to gather something from a system, and we'll get into how we reuse data that we collect. But in this example on the left, right, I'm using an iOS facts module, and depending on the system that you're targeting, there's generally going to be a fact specific module for whatever the device is that you're targeting. Whether it's a Linux box or an F5 load balancer or a Cisco router or switch, finding that appropriate facts module that's going to be there is key, and then having that ability to define in this example, right? Like I don't want all of the facts. I want a subset. And what I really care about in this example is interfaces and VLANs, right? Return that information to me. The other thing that's really cool about this, if you think about it, especially on network devices, right? The facts module is going to SSH into that device to query it. And it's going to issue show commands and have a bunch of regex on the back end that's going to parse that out to get you that structured data. So you don't have to think about a lot of times, what would I have to deal from this, unstructured output to parse out what's that regex look like? How do I get that command data out? The facts module for a lot of this stuff is going to take care of all of that for you. But again, once you've collected the data, you generally want to do something with it, right? And this is where the register command comes in, right? How do I store data from a task so that I can reuse it at a later date, right? So register, the concept of register when I'm running a task, again, is going to be able to take whatever the output of that is, whether it's a fax module or I'm using something else and capturing a show command. Being able to take that data and store it in a variable is done with the register command, and then I can use it in later tasks, right? So in this example, right, I've gathered the interfaces and VLANs from that switch. I've registered it as switch fax. And if we look at what that switch fax structured data looks like when it comes back, right? And I've snipped some of the output, but you can see, right? It's in JSON. It's going to have all of the interface details that I need. It's going to have my VLAN information based on what I've collected, and it's going to be in a structured format to where I can then query and get specific information back out of that playbook. So if we look at this, right, I can now directly access some of those details, right, by using the JSON path to get into that specific area of that structured data that I want, right? So in this scenario, I only want the VLAN information that's returned from the entire fax set. So I can go in and I can go into switch fax, Ansible network resources, and VLANs. And then what you can see is I'm going to get that structured data that's specific to that subset of that data that's returned. So this is really key. If you're maybe you need a MAC address or you need to gather pre-configured IP addresses or anything like that, gathering those facts, using register to store them in a variable, and then being able to call out that specific subset of details or of data at a later date is really key as you're starting to build out playbooks doing kind of varying different things. The concept then, of variables can be taken another step further too, right? And a lot of times, if you think about what you're doing with Ansible, there may be structured data or a template that you need to update in order to push configuration to a device, or maybe you want to take some data that you've gathered from fax and run it through a template and then push that payload to a device. And that's where Jinja comes in. And if we look at this, right, so Jinja itself, it's an extensive templating engine. It has special placeholders in the template to where you can kind of pull in Python-like syntax. And where this is really common, and we'll go through this in the lab in a little bit, is in the F5 world, if you're using AS3, right, you're going to push a declarative payload to a device saying, go do this. All of those payloads, right, can be templated out. And you can see on the left that those variable placeholders that we've talked about kind of in the same format that a playbook is using them, they're being used in Jinja as well. So, I've got app name, I've got what are my destination IP addresses, my certificate information, or maybe I need to feed in a list of data. I'm going to have multiple servers that are going to be pool members. So I can then have that ability to loop through that. And the thing about it is that when I combine the template with that variable data that we've defined, I then kind of, I'm able to render a finished and complete document. What does that look like? If I take my variable data, right? So in this example, I've defined an app name, my destination IP address, certificate information, and then my pool members. When we look at the play down below, right? In this case, we're sending an AS3 payload to an F5 load balancer. And if we look at the body, we're using a lookup module inside Ansible where we're saying, go look this template up. We're giving it the path to the Jinja template, which is this middle box on the slide here. And what we're going to do then is apply all of those variables that have been defined in that playbook to that template so that we can pass off a finished and complete payload to the device, right? So you can see that when we combine that lookup, that template with the variable names defined, the output that will get sent to the device is going to merge the defined variables with that template, and you're going to get that finished payload that's going to be passed off to the device in order to configure it and then be able to do what we need to do on that device side without having to, I think one of the big things and one of the great use cases of this is that you could define this body in the playbook, right? You could build this as part of this, and the play would get unwieldy. You'd have different things that would need to be configured, it would start to it's not optimal for reuse, right? So by using Jinja templates and being able to templatize data like this, I can consume this, from multiple plays. I can use this wherever I need to, and then I also have the ability to make sure that this payload is formatted correctly, so that we can use something like AS3 to push a declarative configuration to a device. So past Jinja templates, the next thing that we want to talk about is really, I think, at a high level, the concept of Ansible roles, right? So Ansible roles are going to give you the ability to take a chunk of a playbook, build it into a callable function so that you can reuse it, right? And I think a big key when doing automation and when starting to build a library internally of Ansible content that you're going to use to automate your environment, roles become key because it's going to give you that ability, maybe as an F5 administrator, to create a role to go out and provision a VIP, and that some other team is going to need to do that, so they're going to consume that code that you've already written. So if you can package it up into a role, it gives you the ability for maximum reuse down the line, right? And if we look at this, if we look at how we call roles inside a playbook, right? We define roles and we're going to call them out by name. That role is actually going to point at a folder on the file system. And inside that role, at a high level, you're going to have tasks and you're going to have variables defined on that file system for that role. The task, right? Again, it's a mini playbook, right? It's going to be a subset of what you would put in that play so that you can call it and reuse it. In this example, right, I'm calling for configuration snapshots on a Cisco ACI fabric, and that's a reusable chunk that, right, for a best practice, I want everybody on every play that they write targeting a fabric to take a snapshot before they push any configuration changes to it. So here's a chunk of code that's reusable. They can call it by calling the config snapshot role. But then you also, outside of having the play, have the ability to have variable files for that role as well. Think of these, I think that the best way to think about the variable files for roles is configuration options that are going to be specific to that role, where you want to make sure that anybody consuming it is going to follow these, have these variables set at this point so that they don't have to worry about them in their play when they consume the role, right? So in this example, right, we're gonna set the export policy, how many snapshots we want to keep, and are we creating that snapshot? These are going to be things that we're going to reuse and should be static. So we're going to define that in a variable file that's packaged up with that role. So those roles, right, give you that ability to package up content, reuse it elsewhere, share with your team, have other people do it, potentially even share with the community, right? And Ansible Galaxy is kind of that central hub for that. So at galaxy.ansible.com, this is that central community hub for all things roles and all things collections. So if you're going to download the F5 collection, or you're going to go download the Cisco ACI collection, or maybe you want to see if the community shared any roles, and when we get into the lab, you'll actually see how we're consuming some community provided roles as well for part of the lab. This is where we get that content from, is out on Ansible Galaxy. So next, before we get into the lab, the last thing that I wanted to cover is just the Red Hat Ansible Tower component, which is, again, if you remember back to what I talked about a little bit earlier ago, the Ansible automation platform contains a lot of different products that are bundled together to give you that cohesive system to do everything. But one of the key components, and I would argue that probably one of the most important components in that platform is Ansible Tower, right? So what is Ansible Tower? It's a centralized system, or a centralized dashboard that's going to provide you the ability to, as an organization, kind of manage, complex deployments. It gives you role-based access control. I think key, it gives you job scheduling. So if there's playbooks that you want to run, on a consistent basis every night, being able to schedule those jobs inside Tower is key. The ability to build and define workflows is really nice too, right? So if I'm going to have a broader workflow that I want someone to run that maybe is consuming across multiple different teams, potentially, where they've all provided their code to automate whatever their infrastructure is, or maybe I want to break down rather than having a big long playbook that does a whole bunch of stuff in it. Being able to break it up into smaller chunks and then build a workflow that chains those together is really key. As well as this is going to be that key to integrate with Git and to provide a northbound API. So if you want to write your automation in Ansible, right, and expose it to, say, ServiceNow's service catalog, that northbound API on Ansible Tower is really a key component of that, of being that glue in the middle of being able to consume Ansible automation from somewhere else. Again, I wanted to touch on the workflow side because I think this is really key, right? Again, if you look at this workflow example here, maybe you're not integrating something like ServiceNow where you're doing approvals. You can build approvals into Ansible Tower workflows as well. So I can build a workflow right in this example, and this is this is a kind of a broken down process of what we'll go through in the lab. But I'm going to reserve an IP address, and if it's successful, then I'm going to go create the VIP using that IP address. Maybe it fails. Maybe there's no IPs left. How do I then go out and open a ticket in ServiceNow and be able to do that? So workflows give you that ability to chain different plays together and then give you options, right? So in the event that the VIP, we get an IP and the VIP creation fails, right? Having that ability then to update the ticket saying, here's the address, the VIP failed, and then go maybe revert and give that address back to the pool so it can be used at a later date. Building these workflows is key, and you'll be able to, as you explore Tower in the lab, you'll be able to see where this is at. So that takes us to the lab and kind of the hands-on component of this. So again, the first thing I wanted to do is just we'll very quickly touch on how to access the lab, right? So again, if you go to wwt.com, you go to My WWT and click on events, you're going to see the hands-on F5 Ansible automation workshop event. Click on that. And again, when you're inside there, you're going to see the lab down below with the Ansible automation training lab. When you hover over that, you'll have the ability to click access lab. And when you do that, it's going to launch that virtual environment for you. So once that happens, click view labs, and that's going to take you to your lab page here, which is then going to give you the ability to access that lab. So you're going to click access lab, which is going to take you again to the page where you're going to have the open an ATC lab gateway. Once you click on that, it's going to drop you into the gateway and take you into the lab environment that we're going to be working in. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to go through this lab together. We do have people monitoring the chat. So if you have any issues, you have any questions, please don't hesitate to you drop those into the chat. We'll make sure that we get those answered for you. And then also just a housekeeping note again as well, right? So when I start to share my browser, if it seems fuzzy, again, on the live stream, just click the gear and make sure that you're on 720p, and that will give you the best experience for being able to see this content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop into this view here. So the first module of the lab is really just a crash course on using Ansible on the command line. And what I'm going to do is pull up my copy of the lab here, and I'm going to get away from full screen just so that I can have both of these up at the same time. So here I am in the lab guide, in the lab and with the lab guide. And when we look at the lab itself, there is going to be multiple sections, multiple scenarios that we're going to work through. But the first one is just setting up Ansible, right? So the high-level tasks that we're going to work through in this section, we're going to configure that host file, right? That static inventory. We're going to install the F5 Ansible collection, and then we're going to configure device authentication so that we can manage the web servers that we're going to deploy the applications onto. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is, now that I'm inside the jump box, and as you scroll down the left, right, we're gonna see, and there's a full lab guide, and the thing I want to really point you to is that in these lab guides, we want to be we're very descriptive. We want to make sure that you're understanding what's going on and what's being done through each one of these sections, right? So we're going to break down the host file, and we're going to walk you through how to get started with this lab and really work through these tasks. So the first thing that we need to do is just validate that Ansible's installed, right? So I'm going to open up the Windows Subsystem for Linux command line. And once I'm inside there, I'm just going to run Ansible -- version to make sure that Ansible itself is installed on this workstation, which it is. So this will come back and it'll give me the version that it's running, which is 2.10.2. And then the next thing that I need to do is I need to pull down the inventory file for this lab. So we have made this so that you can just clone it down and get a copy of that. So what I'm going to do is use wget, and I'm going to pull down the host file, and I'm just going to store this in my folder ~/hosts, right? So if we look at this, once that's downloaded, you can see that from an inventory standpoint, right, we've got some big IPs that we're going to target, both primary and secondary. We have different web servers. We have AS3 web servers we're going to focus on. We have info blocks, and then kind of some of those variables that we need to cover and manage our connectivity there. So that's kind of the first step, right, is pulling down that host file, getting our inventory set up and ready to go. One of the things that we're doing in this lab, and by default, Ansible collections will install in a default path in your home directory in the .ansible folder /collections is where they're going to go by default, but you can update that if you want and override that if there's some reason. And we do go through that in this lab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit in my home directory the .ansible.cfg file. And inside that file, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in my new path to collections. And I'm going to make sure that if any of because we've fixed this lab at a specific version, right? If any of the modules have deprecation warnings, we're just going to not show those to clean up the output that comes on the display. So now I've updated that Ansible config file. And the next thing that I need to do, right, if we scroll down, is we need to install the Ansible collection now that we've defined where to install it to, right? So what I'm going to do is I am going to run the Ansible Galaxy command, right? So Ansible-Galaxy collection install. And the collection that we're installing is the f5networks.f5_modules collection. Now, what we're doing is we are fixing this at a specific version, right? So when we built the lab, we want to make sure that everybody is getting the same experience as when it was built. So we're saying, I want to install version 1.8.1 of the collection, and I'll put that in /root/collections from an install basis. So I run that command, and this may take a few minutes to download and go out and get it, but it goes out to Galaxy. It validates, are there any dependencies that I need? And then it's going to install those collections in that path and pull those down to the machine so we can use them. So next, now that the collections are installed, what we need to do is we need to exchange some SSH keys with the web servers so that we can get authenticated from an Ansible standpoint with those devices. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to generate SSH keys on this workstation or on this jump box. Again, here, don't set a passphrase, just use the defaults, hit enter all the way through. It's going to generate that SSH key file. And then now what I need to do is I need to exchange those SSH keys with the web servers that we're going to target in this lab. So I'm going to use SSH copy ID. Yes, I want to pass it over. I'm going to use the password for the Linux boxes, which is default. And I'm going to, there's two web servers, right? So it's both 104 and you'll see in the documentation 105. So I do the same thing there. So now I've exchanged those SSH keys with the web servers that we're going to target. So Ansible now has that ability to authenticate. So from a lab, for lab 1.1, that really takes care of everything that we need to do from a foundational level, if you will, to configure our inventory, get the F5 collection installed so that we can start to write a playbook, and then the device authentication is done so that we can get some content deployed to the web servers that we're going to target in the next lab. So in lab 1.2, this is where we're going to write the first playbook. And there's really a handful of tasks that we're going to go through at a high level. First of all, we want to understand facts. Like I talked about in the presentation, how do I get information about the system that I'm targeting? So using the facts component will help us do that. Then we're going to start to break down and we're going to write our first playbook. We're going to execute that. And then we'll get into how to use Jinja templates and deploy a new index page to the web server that we've stood up using Ansible. So as I go back to the lab, now that we're here, right, the first thing that I want to do is, well, actually, sorry, before I move on, the last thing I want to do is we can validate that SSH key exchange has happened and that Ansible can reach those web servers. So if I run the Ansible so Ansible command, web servers being the inventory group, and I'm just going to load the Ansible ping module and load the inventory file so it knows how to get to web servers, I should get 2 responses back that are successful, right? So you can see that it was a success on both of these hosts, letting me know that it was able to reach those web servers and that we do have connectivity there. So now that that's done, the next thing that we want to do is first, let's just take a look at what Ansible knows about the jump box that we're using, right? So I use the Ansible command. I'm going to load the setup module, and then I'm going to target localhost. So when I run this command, this is gathering the Ansible facts about the local workstation that we're working from, right? And so this takes just a few seconds. This is going to pull back a ton of data. This is going to have all sorts of information about what we're doing, right? I can, as you see, I can kind of scroll through what processors are in here, what's attached to it. There's all sorts of data that gets collected by default, right? And the hard part about that is trying to figure out what to do with it, right? So I'll find my command line here again. There it is. So if I want to filter that, I have that ability to do that, and I can call that same command and I can apply a filter. And that filter is going to say, get me back. I just want the host name, right? So I'm going to provide the key of that variable that I want back, and I'm going to run that again. And now when I run it this way using a filter, rather than having to scroll through all of that data and go figure out what I'm trying to get, I can specifically say, okay, show me the host name of this box. And then it's going to come back and it's going to return me the structured data with only that variable in it, right? With Ansible _ host name, and then the name of the jump box itself. The next thing that I can do is I can use the same thing in it, but I can target the web servers, right? So now what I can do is instead of focusing on the local host here, I can use Ansible to query the web servers and say, I want all of the IPv4 addresses that are configured on those target devices. So when I run this command, Ansible is using SSH. It's going out to those web servers and it's collecting the facts data, and it's returning me specifically that IPv4 address data. So you can see for the first web server, right, the IPv4 address is configured here, as well as then for the second web server, we see the different set of addresses there as well. So once that's done, and now we've validated that we're collecting facts, we've got access to everything. When we look at this, the next thing that we want to do is we want to get ready to start configuring and writing some playbooks. So what you're going to do in the lab is you're going to actually open up Visual Studio Code. And you can do it either through the desktop icon or down on the taskbar. There's going to be a Visual Studio Code icon there. And when I click on that, we'll give it just a second here. It's going to open up a copy of Visual Studio Code. And the first thing that we need to do inside Visual Studio Code is configure and define a workspace. Where are we going to write our playbooks, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to add a folder to Workspace. And what you're going to want to do is once you're in here, you're going to want to navigate to Documents. And then once you're in Documents, just right-click and create a new folder. And we're going to call this folder Lab2. So once I click Add, you're going to see that in my workspace now I have a Lab2 folder with nothing inside of it, right? So now we're ready to get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do inside Lab2 is I'm going to create a new file, and that file is going to be called install nginx.yaml. So our first playbook that we're going to do is going to go out, and what it's going to do is it's going to install nginx on that host or on the web server. So this playbook itself, if we look at the content, and I'll kind of break this down, right? First of all, we're targeting, again, that inventory group of web servers. We are using the remote user of root, and when become is set to true, that says, I want Ansible to execute these commands with root privileges, right? So the first task that we're going to do, we're just going to clean up that box. We're going to remove any residual packages using apt. And then from there, we're going to go in and we're going to install Nginx using apt as a package manager. And then we're going to validate that it's up and running. So once that's done, or once that is defined, you want to make sure that you save the playbook, right? So go up to File and click Save so that it's written out to the file system. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back to our command line. And what we're going to do is we are going to change into the folder that the playbooks are in. So in /mount/c/user/admin documents and lab2. Once we're in there, we're going to run the Ansible playbook command. We're going to do install Nginx, and we're going to target, or we're going to load the inventory host that we downloaded earlier. And when we do that, and we run this playbook, right, it's going to go out and it's going to run through all of the tasks that we've defined in this play. So again, it's going to remove the packages, it's going to install Nginx, and then it's going to validate that the process is started and that everything is running on that system. So we'll give this just a second to go. You can see that now what it's doing is it's going and cleaning up those residual packages. And then we'll give it a second and it'll go out, it'll install that software, and then it will start that service. So while this is running, I'm going to prep and stage a web browser so that we can show once it's done that it's working. So it's finished the first host, it's cleaned up after itself. Now it's moving on to the second one. And if you remember from the presentation, when I talked about that triple for loop, right? This is that for loop in action, right? We're running a play. So we're looping through the play. Inside that play, then we are looping through the individual tasks, and then on each task, we're looping through each individual host, making sure that task is applied to that host. So now that this play is finished, right, we can see that it's installed in Nginx and it's ensured it's running. So we have four tasks that finished okay, 2 that resulted in changes on the system, right? That would be removing the residual packages and then installing Nginx. So if now that that's done, if I go in the browser, I'm going to go to 10.128.20.104, right? This is our first server. And then in the second tab, I'm going to go to 10.128.20.105. And you can see that we have the second server up and running now as well. So our playbook is done. We've completed and deployed Nginx. We have working web servers, right? But now what we want to do is we want to update the index page to give us something a little bit different from a content standpoint. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and inside Lab 2, I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this update index.html. Oops, excuse me. Let me rename that. Update index.yaml. And then I'm also going to create a file, and I'm going to create index.j2, which is going to be our Jinja template for the content that we're doing. So first of all, in our update index playbook, what we're going to do, again, we're targeting the web servers. We are going to define what is the file we're updating, and then what's the template that we're going to load from a content standpoint, and then we're going to copy that rendered template into that index location, right? So this is the playbook. So I'm going to save that. And then I need to update the Jinja template. And if we look at this, what we're going to render is just a very basic web page, but we're going to, from a variable standpoint, you can see that we're going to pull in the host name that we're targeting of the device. We are going to tell us, again, what server we're connected to. We're going to use that index location, right, which we've defined here as var www html index.html as the path. And then we're going to say which template we use to render it. So I've saved that. So we now have our Jinja template, and we have our playbook to update the index page. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go in and I'm going to go back to my command line, and I'm going to launch that. Playbook. So Ansible playbook update index.yaml. Once that runs, it's going to render those templates, right? It's going to go out to those servers. It's going to render the template and push those templates out to the web server. So now if I go back to my browser and I reload these pages, you can see that what I've connected to and that everything is updated and that matches the template that we've pushed. So as a whole, right, that now has got us through all of Lab 1.2. So we've understood facts. We've walked through the first handful of playbooks. We've executed those playbooks, and then we've also learned a little bit about Jinja, and we're able to update that template and push that content to those servers. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to step this up, right, from a complexity standpoint. So if you look at the environment, and I think why people a lot of times look at F5 as a great place to really even get started with network automation. It's something that's being a lot of requests, right? A lot of load balancer requests for a lot of applications inside environments. And a lot of times there's a big broad workflow that goes with that, right? So I need an IP address. I need to configure DNS for the VIP that I'm creating. I need to configure the load balancers. I need to deploy my applications, and ultimately I want to do all of that from an automation standpoint. So in Lab 1.3, we really are going to focus on all of that. So if I go back to the lab and we look, right, and as you can see, as you go through the lab guide, as you're working through this, there's a lot of really good content breaking down everything that we're doing inside this environment. And I highly recommend that as you're going through this, you consume that. But now that we're at Lab 1.3, right, the next thing that we want to do is we need to kind of set up our environment a little bit more, and we're going to get set up for Lab 3. So what I'm going to do, just going to go back to the command line, and I'm going to scaffold out that directory for Lab 3. And once that's done, I go back to Visual Studio Code. And again, I go to File, and I'm going to add a folder to the workspace. And now you'll see Lab 3. So I'm just going to click on Lab 3, and I'm going to click Add. And that gives me my, my blank structure that we need to do some work. And now that I'm in here, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to create a new file, and we're going to call this deploy.yaml. And inside this playbook, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to target info blocks. And so what we're going to do is we are going to we need some information in order to automate info blocks directly, right? Connection is local, so it's this jump box talking directly to the info blocks node. There's some information that I need, right? What subnet do I need an IP address out of? So in this case, it's 10.128.10.0/24. And what's my domain that I'm targeting? In this, in the lab, it's example.com. So the first thing, or the first task that we're going to do, is we're going to actually use a lookup plugin that's provided for info blocks. It's NIOS Next IP. And what I need to do is I need to provide some details to that lookup plugin in order to run. First, what network am I looking for an open IP address in, which is the VIP network? And then from a provider information standpoint, this is where I need the connection details for Infoblox itself, right? So what's the DNS entry or the IP address for that Infoblox host? What are my credentials to get in there? So we're going to use a lookup plugin to go get the next available IP. Once we have that IP and we've done that, we've set that as a fact, and the variable is now reserved IP. Then I'm going to go out to Infoblox and I'm going to configure a host record. I'm going to configure an A record based on the app name that we pass in under example.com. We're going to reserve that IP address and create all of that lookup information that we need. So I'm going to save this playbook. And now that playbook is saved, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to execute this, and I'm just going to show you what this looks like to go reserve an IP address. So I go back to the command line, and I change into the lab 3 directory that we created, and now I'm going to run deploy.yaml, and I'm just going to pass in an app name of test app. So what this playbook again is doing, it's going out, it's saying, hey, what's the next available IP that I can use? It's getting that back, and then it's going and creating a DNS entry for testapp.example.com. So it got that next available address, and then now what it's doing is it's configuring that host record. So as this finishes up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the jump box. I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to log into Infoblox. And I'm going to proceed. Username and password for this are just admin and admin. And then as this loads, what I'm going to do is click on data management. Under IPAM, here's that subnet, right? 10.128.10.0/24. When I click on that, you're going to get a grid view of all of the IP addresses in that subnet. And so this is going to hand them out in order. So if I click on this last purple box, you're going to see that this is testapp.example.com. So this is that address that was reserved, 10.128.10.3, and then the related object was that A record that was created for testapp.example.com. So that's kind of the first step, right? So now we've got this playbook set up to go reserve an IP address and then configure DNS. The next step in the workflow, right? And we're gonna just we're gonna work in this same playbook. What we're gonna do is we're going to extend from a content standpoint, we're going to pull in everything that we need to do to go out and provision the load balancers. So if we look at the content, right? So again, we're targeting the primary F5 device. We've loaded the F5 networks.f5 modules collection. We have some variables that we need that are going to get used across all of these tasks, right? So what's the server username and password, and are we validating certificates or not? And in the lab, we are not. Then in order, right? Like I talked about, a playbook runs top to bottom. We're going to create the nodes. We're then going to create the pool. And then once the pool's created, we're going to assign those nodes that we've created to that pool. And then we're going to create the virtual server on the front end to handle those inbound requests, right? So that's the first step. And then the next thing that we're going to do, right? We talked about, so if we look at the workflow on the left, we're going to reserve an IP, we're going to build the VIP, and then what we're going to do is we're going to deploy that application that lives behind it, right? So what we're going to do is make sure that we have the ability to interact with Docker on the web servers that are sitting behind the load balancer, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Ansible Galaxy to install a community published role to interact with Docker. So as you can see, right, and we break down in the command what we're doing, right? But this role is specific and going to allow us once it's installed to interact with Docker on the target host. So I'm going back to the command line, and I'm going to use Ansible-Galaxy install, and then I'm installing the role. It's from Jeff Geerling, and it's a pip role. So we're going to install that, and once that's deployed, that's ready for us to consume in the playbook now that it's been installed on the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to build out this playbook. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, the next thing that we need is once we've configured the F5 nodes, then we want to target the web servers, right? So again, we've consumed that role, but we need to load some Python dependencies. So that's where the Geerling guy.pip role will be used. And then what we're going to install is Docker. And then once Docker is running, we're going to pull down and we're going to start a WordPress container on that host, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to expose a specific application port to that container. So you'll see that when we call the playbook, that'll be passed in as we launch the playbook. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to save this play again. So this playbook is saved, and again, as we scroll up, it's really 3 plays inside one playbook. First, we're going to reserve that address and create DNS. Next, we're going to go out to the load balancer. We're going to create the nodes in the pool. We're going to do all the assignment of the nodes to the pool. We're going to create the virtual server, and then we're going to target the workload that lives behind the load balancer and get everything installed that we need to do. So now that the playbook is ready and the playbook has been saved, when I go to the command line again, I'm calling Ansible playbook deploy.yaml, and the extra variables, which I talked about in the presentation that we're passing in now, we're setting the app name to WordPress, and we're setting the application port to 8001. And so when I run this play, this is again going to go out to info blocks and grab an address and start to configure that. And this will take just a few minutes to run. So now we've got about 30 minutes to go here with our allotted time. So we'll work through this as far as we can. And then hopefully we'll get to the point that at least if we can get through these first sections of labs, we'll be good. And if we can get into the Ansible Tower components, it'll be even better. Just a word of note. The lab reservation that you have and that you're working from, I believe you'll have 2 more days of access with that lab. So even if we don't get through to the end by the end of this session, don't worry, you've got access. You can drop back in, you can reuse it or finish up afterwards, or continue to work on it even after we drop. So this is taking a little bit of time here. There it went. So it grabbed the IP address, configured the host record. Now what it's doing is it's going out and it's configuring the nodes on the F5. Once that's done, it's creating the pool. It's assigning those nodes to the pool. Creating the virtual server. And then now that it's done on the F5, it's going out and it is targeting the web server, right? So it's installed the Gearling guy, or it's consuming the Gearling guy role, validating the pip is installed. It's installing the packages that are required, which is Docker. Once Docker is installed, then it's going to pull down that WordPress image and fire up that container. So now that this play has been successful and everything is done, no failures, I'm going to go back to InfoBlocks first, and I'm going to refresh this. And you can see now that we have a new address entry here. So it's now reserved 10.128.10.4. And you can see that that's now wordpress.example.com. So that's done inside InfoBlocks. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the load balancer. And I'm going to log in here, and this is just admin and admin. And I'm going to go to local traffic. And the first thing that I'm going to look at is nodes, right? So we've configured nodes. So 10.128.20.104 and 105, which are our servers. We have a pool for wordpress.example.com. That pool has those nodes as members. And you can see port 8001, which is where we've exposed that WordPress image via container. And then you can see that we've got our wordpress.example.com virtual server VIP configured on the front end. So now what I can do is I can, in another browser tab, I can go to wordpress.example.com. This may take a second to start up, but looks like it's responding pretty quick here. And you can see that it is starting to load. And what it's going to do is it's just going to take you right to the kind of initial WordPress setup page once it comes up. So yeah, you can see that that installation is good. We've automated and pushed out WordPress to both of those web servers. It's ready to be configured. So that is lab 1.3. That kind of breaks down everything that we're doing as it relates to reserving an address, configuring the entire workflow on the F5 side, and then deploying that application behind the load balancer. So next in lab 1.4, we're going to do this, and we're going to basically go through the same workflow or a very similar workflow, but we're going to do this in a little different fashion, right? So I think a thing to think about, right, or a concept to to think about, especially with tools like Ansible, is you have the idea of imperative automation versus declarative automation, right? So in imperative, I have to define all of the steps. I have to say, these are the things you need to do, and this is the order that you need to do them in, right? So if we look at the configuration on the F5 or the playbook that we called, right? Very specific order. This is the same order you would do it if you were doing it from the command line, right? Create nodes, create pool, add those nodes to the pool, then create the VIP, right? In order, top to bottom, like we talked about, but I have to define all of the steps. What we're going to do in this next example is we're going to use F5AS3, which is declarative. I'm going to pass a payload that the load balancer will deal with and just go take care of all of those steps for me in one shot, right? So I'm declaring my intent for the device, and then they're taking care of it and dealing with it in the order that it needs to be taken care of when it's pushed to the load balancer. So we're going to go through a very similar workflow with this as well. So the first thing that we're going to do inside the lab is we're going to go in and we're going to build out all of the scaffolding that we need again for this lab. So we're going to go back to our documents. We're going to create lab 4. We're going to change into that. And now that that's done, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to add that lab 4 to Visual Studio Code like we did the prior versions. And then we're going to start to build out our new playbook. So again, File, add folder to workspace. Now we're picking lab 4. And then inside lab 4, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file under the root of lab 4. We're going to, again, call this deploy.yaml. And I'm going to put the contents of this first playbook in, right? This is going to look pretty familiar. This is what we've already been using, right? We're going to go get that address, and then we're going to create the A record for it. The next thing that we're going to do is in this workflow that's a little bit different, we're going to deploy SSL to the load balancer with this process. And we're just going to use a self-sign cert that we're generating locally. So the next part of this play is we are going to validate that we have OpenSSL deployed on the local workstation and that it exists. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of generating a private key. So let me get that in there. So next, once we've validated OpenSSL is installed, we're going to generate a private key, generate a certificate signing request, and then we're going to generate that self-signed certificate that we're going to push to the F5. So that's the first chunk of the playbook. So I'm going to save it right here. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to build out the Jinja template for the AS3 payload that we're going to send to configure the load balancer. So under the templates folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call this as3.j2. And from a content standpoint, this is going to look very similar to what you saw in the presentation, right? So if we look at this AS3 payload, from a declaration standpoint, we're going to feed in the application name, and then we're going to actually build a tenant. And then under that AS3 tenant that we're creating, we're going to define the web app. We're going to create, again, everything that we need, right? We're going to create a VIP. It's going to be on HTTPS. We're going to pull in that self-signed certificate that we're creating in the prior tasks. And then we're going to create the pool and the members, and we're going to loop through all the members that we provide and pull those in and configure all of that as well. So that's the template. And then what we're going to do is we need to then finish out the deploy.yaml playbook. And what we're doing next, now that we've configured the certificate, we're going to take and we're going to push that AS3 payload to the load balancer to configure it. And we're doing that with the URI module, right? So you'll notice that this is not an F5 specific module. This is just the Ansible built-in URI module. And what we're doing is we're targeting the URL, the API endpoint on the load balancer. We're using an HTTP post method to upload the content. And then the body of our payload is going to be that formatted Jinja 2 template, right? With everything replaced. So again, from a variable standpoint, we're loading the pool members in from the static inventory. Our destination IP is coming from the variable that we set when we reserved it from info blocks, and then we're uploading those certificates that we've created as well. So now that that's done, I'm going to save this again. And what we're going to do now is we are going to run this playbook from the command line. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to name the app AS3 app. So now that the playbook is running, it's going out to info blocks, reserving an address, creating the DNS entry. Locally on this jump box, it's validating OpenSSL is installed, generates a private key and a certificate signing request for as3app.example.com. Once that certificate's generated, it then sends that AS3 payload to the F5. So it uses HTTP post with that declarative payload that's taking care of everything that we had defined in the prior lab, where we were calling it out in an imperative model, step by step. Now we just send a single payload to do everything, and that is done and successful. So as I now look at this, if I go back to the browser and we go to info blocks and I just refresh here, you're going to see that we have as3app.example.com configured. If I go back to the F5 and we look at the partition, we configured an AS3 app partition. And inside this partition, we have our nodes, the 20.106 and 20.107 that are in that partition. We have our pool, app_pool. And then we have our virtual server defined as well, service main. And so if I go to, in the browser, I just go to AS3. So I'm going to do this on purpose. I'm going to go to http://as3app.example.com. It redirected me to HTTPS, right? So you're going to get a certificate warning because it's self-signed. But if we look at that and we proceed, you're going to see that it's now just loading up the index from those servers we configured earlier. And if I click on not secure and I look at that certificate, you'll be able to see all of the details about that self-signed certificate that we generated on the machine as part of that play. So that wraps up kind of the first part of the lab, right? So that would be the more of the command line interaction, the Ansible engine side of it. So now what we've worked through to this point, right? We've understood using Ansible to gather facts and understanding that we can use Ansible to interrogate a system and find information out about it. We've worked through kind of the imperative model of using Ansible to configure F5 load balancers using the Ansible modules. And then what we've also worked through is using Ansible with F5 AS3 from a declarative standpoint to push that similar configuration to that device, as well as expose you to some things like using Ansible to interact with Docker, using Ansible and Jinja templates to update, web content, and then even using Ansible to generate certificates, which is also really powerful. So next in module 2, it's really about kind of pulling these two together. We're not going to focus on writing playbooks, but what we're going to focus on is pulling these playbooks into Tower. So the first thing that we're going to do now is we're just going to get logged into in lab 2.1. We're just going to explore Ansible Tower. So at a high level, so I'm back in the jump box. I am going to go to a new browser tab and I'm going to launch Ansible Tower. And then it's got a self-signed certificate, so just click through that. And my username and password is admin and admin again. And so now that I'm inside Tower, I think the thing to call out here is everything on the left is really going to be kind of the driver, right? All of the links are going to be here on the left. And so you've got, dashboard, the jobs, which is going to give you the job log. You're going to have the ability to define and, configure schedules. But where we're really going to live throughout this exercise is going to be in inventories and projects and templates. So what we're going to do is from and I'm going to jump ahead in the lab guide here. So What we're going to do is walk through, and we're going to consume some playbooks that are already stored in a Git repo. So you're going to integrate with Git, and then we're going to build a job template that consumes a playbook that's stored on Git, and then we're going to run and launch that job from there. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we need to configure a project. And inside Tower, projects are that integration to Git where this is going to happen, right? So I'm going to click the plus, and my first once I'm at the new project create screen, my project name is going to be Lab 2, and my source control type, right, is going to be Git, and then I'm going to have a URL which is in the lab guide here. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that that Git URL here, and then if the production, right, you're probably targeting the master or the main branch in Git for your production workloads, but maybe you've got a lab instance where you're consuming a different branch in the same repo. Maybe you've got a develop branch or something like that. Whatever branch, if it's not default, you're gonna define that here. And then the thing that we want to look at and the thing we want to check is update revision on launch. So what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that every time we run the job that's tied to this template, or when we run the job that's referencing the template that we'll create, it's going to make sure that it's always pulling down the latest version of those playbooks from Git. So we're going to go ahead and click save here. We've now created that project. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to populate the inventory. So on the left, we're going to go to inventories. We're going to click the plus and create a new inventory. And we are just going to call this Ansible Lab Inventory. We're going to click Save. Now that we've created the inventory itself, we're going to create an inventory group, right? So if you think about what we talked about with the static inventory, all of those concepts still apply here. It's just driven and added from the web UI. So I'm going to click on groups, and I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to call this big IP underscore devices. And I'm going to click Save. And then once that's done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on hosts. So we've created the group. Now I'm going to add some hosts to this group. So I'm going to click the plus here, and we're only going to target, we're going to create a new host. We're just going to target one of them. So it's going to be bigip-a.example.net. And then I'm going to click save. Now, what I can do at the host level is I can apply some variables to that host, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to define the provider details that we need for the playbook. So I'm going to go back to that host, and you're going to see the variable section here down below. And I'm just going to paste in what we needed. Helps to use the right content. I'm going to paste in what we needed here, which is, again, we're defining the address for the server, username and password, and we're not validating certificates. This is very similar to what you saw in the other playbooks. So now we've defined an inventory. We've got a host and we've got a group and a host and inventory. We've integrated with Git. The next thing that we need to do is create a job template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to templates. I'm going to click plus, and I'm going to create a new job template. And the name of this one is going to be create pool. The job type. So there's two job types that you can set. You can set run or check, right? Check is going to be just like I talked about in the presentation. It's the equivalent of adding the -- check mode when you're running the playbook from the command line to where you would show what it would do without doing it, right? But we're going to create a run job. We're going to target that inventory that we just created, which is Ansible Lab Inventory. Project-wise, we created Lab 2. And then playbooks, right? So now you see this playbook list from Lab 2 is available to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick Create Pool. And then from a credential standpoint, we're going to select the demo credential. And we're going to run one fork of this process when we target it. And then we want to make sure that everything else is left at default. So we're going to click Save. And then we're going to add one more template for the removal of that pool. So now that I've got create pool, I'm going to create a job template, and this is going to be remove pool. Again, very similar. Run. We're going to target the same inventory. We're going to consume the same project. The difference now is we're going to use the remove pool playbook. same credentials, one fork, and save. So now we have our two job templates. So now what we can do is we can launch these. So if I go to the list of templates, you'll see we have create pool, we have remove pool. At create pool, to run this, I'm just going to click the rocket, which is going to fire off this job. So you can see it's going to take you to another job screen that's going to show you the status of this job. This data is kept, it's historical. So if someone else launched a job or you wanted to go back, maybe it failed and pull and understand what went wrong, this data is going to be captured, right? And it's available from the jobs link on the left. So we can see that this playbook went out, it created a pool, added a couple web servers to it. And if I go back to the F5 and I go back to the common partition and we look at pools, you'll see Ansible web server pool. This was the pool that we just added from Tower. So we can see that that ran. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go run the same job, which is going to, or I'm going to run the other job, which is just going to go remove that pool that we created, right? So when I click remove pool, I launch that. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to go out. It's going to run that play. It's going to then go out and remove that pool that we just created. And if I go back to the F5 and I refresh this, you will see that that pool is gone. So what we're walking through and working through here is how you would pull in a playbook, maybe an existing one into Tower, and scaffold it out so that you can then create it as a launchable job inside Tower. The last scenario that we're going to work through here is how do I provide the ability to capture user input from someone when they run a job. Maybe I need to ask them a question and get that filled out before the job will run correctly. So what I'm going to do is we are going to go out and we are going to create another project quickly. This project is going to be called Scenario 1. Again, this is Git, and then we have the URL here. I'm going to paste that in, and we're going to update on launch, like always. Best practice to pull the latest version of the playbook. Now that that project is created, I'm going to go out, I'm going to create another job template, and we're going to call this job template create app. This is a run. We're going to target the same Ansible lab inventory. But now in our project, we're going to pick scenario 1. We're going to do the create app playbook, the demo credential, one fork, and we are going to save this. So now that the job template's done, you'll see that a button after I've clicked save for add survey exists. So when I click add survey, this is gonna give me the ability to build the prompts that are gonna go when I run that job. So the first one we're gonna run is application name. I need to define the variable name. So when I collect that input, what am I storing it as? This is gonna be app_name. My answer type is text, and I can set a maximum length for this. I only want 10 characters here. So that adds the first one. The next one that I'm going to add is the destination IP address. I'm going to store this as the VIP_IP. This is going to be text and 16 characters long. So now I've saved that. I have the survey as part of this job template. So now if I go back to templates and I launch the create app template, I'm now prompted for an application name and a destination IP address, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to respond with survey app, and I'm going to give an address of 10.128.10.22. And when I click next, it's going to say, hey, I'm passing in these extra variables. App name is survey app. VIP IP is 10.128.10.22. I click launch, and then it'll go out and it'll pass those variables in. It's going to run the job. And it's going to go out, it's going to create the pool, add the web server, right? Go through the whole process, deploy the VIP. And then once this is done, we'll see that everything was successful. And if I go back to the F5, and again, we look at the pools, we're going to see survey app pool. We're going to see the members that are inside there. And then if we go up to virtual servers, we're going to see survey app, right? Both an 80 and a 443. So that is kind of the end of it as far as Tower goes. So what we really wanted to do was get you excited about using Tower, pulling playbooks into Tower. One of the things I want to call out about these lab environments is there's a defined lab guide, right? There's things you can work through, but when you think about it, this environment, it's got load balancers, it's got web servers, it's got all the tooling that you would need. So you can be as creative as you want with using this environment to do whatever you need to do using Ansible and virtual F5s and web servers and things like that. So just because it's not in the lab guide doesn't mean that you can't configure the device. And you do have the ability, after the 2 days is up, again, to go back to wwt.com, navigate to that infrastructure automation page, and then find this lab in the list and click launch. And, you can launch this as many times as you need to. So lab-wise, that's everything at the end of the guide. The last section of the guide will have a bunch of links to some resources that you can consume, some links to videos and things like that as well. So I do want to thank you for that. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to jump back out to the presentation real quick. So let me get to the end here. So just some additional resources from a WWT standpoint as we wrap this up. We talked about this earlier when I walked through the platform. The WWT infrastructure automation community, it's kind of your one-stop shop for all things automation from us here at WWT. Links to the lab that we just ran through and everything are at the bottom of that as well. And then the next community, the RTP Programmability and Automation Meetup Group. This has been something that we've been involved with for a while now. Like I said, there's a session this afternoon where Joel King from WWT is going to talk about getting your development environment set up on your workstation. So if you think about what we just went through, using Visual Studio Code and working through a jump box to be successful and do this into production or on a daily basis, I should say, you want to make sure that your workstation is set up and capable of doing that. So, make sure that if you've got time and you're interested, all of the content is on the community, the link to the meetup group that you can join. That's this afternoon. All of the content, if you can't make it and you want to consume it at a later date, will be posted on this community as well. And that was all I had. So I do want to thank everybody for their time. Anytime we can get 2 hours of your time, it's much appreciated. With that, we are at the end. I'd like to thank, F5 and Red Hat both for not only joining us. I know we had some of them on the call, but obviously the technologies that we're using and being able to put those together has been a really great thing. And they're two of our valued partners.